Hi there, this is Prague Talk, a podcast from Radio Prague International. My name is Ian Willoughby. My guest this time out is Jan Zikmund. Earlier this year, Jan launched Zikmund Literary, an agency that primarily aims to help Czech authors find readers around the world. But how does he plan to achieve this? How do books from this country tend to fare in foreign markets? And what other states can Czechia learn from in this arena? In this edition of Prague Talk, I discuss these questions and more with Jan Zikmund, who's in his mid-30s and previously helped promote Czech writing in English-speaking countries at the state-funded Czech Literary Centre.
I felt that there is a need for a new literary agency here. There are a lot of writers and poets that have no foreign representation. So there are some publishing houses like Host and Paseka and Argo that have people that are focusing on promoting their books abroad. But there are many other publishers that don't do this service for writers. And so, especially now, this year, Czechia will be the guest of honor at the Frankfurt Book Fair, which is a kind of big thing. And not just because of this, but I generally felt that there is room for a new agency. And, you know, because I learned so much at the Czech Literary Centre, I had this desire to actually use my contacts, use my knowledge, and build something on my own, something independent. So, you know, I spent 6 years at the Czech Literary Centre, and I felt that I would like to try something new and focus on specific authors rather than representing the kind of the whole Czech literature that I was doing at CzechLit.
And are there any other agents offering the kind of services you are now offering?
Yes, there are other, 3 or 4 agents that are already representing some Czech writers, and I think they are doing a fairly good job. But the Czech literary scene is quite big, and there are all these different genres. So it's not just fiction. There is comics, there is poetry, there is sci-fi, and I think most agents focus on fiction, and I would like to focus maybe also on the other literary forms and genres. So that's kind of the difference.
And generally speaking, if it comes to literary fiction, what's the position of Czechia today, let's say on the world, in quotation marks, market? Do many Czech books reach readers internationally? If they do, how much success can they really have?
There's been this debate for years about this issue, and a lot of people are saying that we don't really have anybody prominent, anybody that would be a world-class writer. And that's partly true, but partly false. I think when I come to the UK or US, people only know Kundera, and they always mention Kundera. Maybe some people know Hrabal, Klima, but people don't really know anybody contemporary. That's true. But at the same time, I think there are some writers like Marek Šindelka, Radka Denemarková, Jaroslav Rudyš, people like that who have had success in one particular country. In the case of Rudyš and Denemarková, that's Germany. Šindelka has been doing very well in the Netherlands. We have some writers that are quite popular in Poland. So I think this kind of local success or local prominence, I think prominence is a better word than success, I think that's been there, and I think that these writers could build on that. So I feel we have a lot of talents here and some great writers, but I think we are still looking for our Olga Tokarczuk in a way, somebody that would really kind of jump like a one level higher and gain this the worldwide reputation. That's true.
But is the problem that the Czech writers aren't at that level? It's not really about marketing or them reaching outside the borders, it sounds like.
That's hard to say because, very often it's about the promotion and about having a good literary agent. Also, it's about being lucky sometimes as well. Sometimes, it's about all it takes is some big American publishing house that maybe knows your agent, and then you get published by a big press, and then other countries start paying attention. They are saying, "Oh wow, we should also publish this person." So sometimes it's about luck as well. But I think That's also why I'm starting the literary agency. I think Czech literary agents are also improving, and I feel that once the literary agents will work very well, then there's a much bigger chance that at least one or two fiction writers will get a kind of bigger reputation.
And are there any particular countries from which the Czechs could draw inspiration in terms of states that maybe punch above their weight a little bit?
I think generally we should look northern. Finland, for example. I mean, they were the guest of honor at the Frankfurt Book Fair in 2014, and they had a very nice and successful presentation there. They collect stats about the state of Finnish literature abroad, and I know from their stats that they've had a lot of interest from UK and US publishers, especially in the years after the Frankfurt Book Fair. So maybe the year of the book fair and then a year or two later. So I think they are doing a very good job there. They have a wonderful literary center in Helsinki. So because they are similar size, it's also a fairly small country and small language. I think we can definitely draw inspiration from them. And obviously, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, these countries, I think they've been doing a very good job.
Given that the Czechs are going to be the guest of honor, whatever it's called, at Frankfurt this year, do you think the Czechs are ready? Are they well prepared to make the most of the opportunity?
So I think that Czechs definitely are ready. I think the Moravian Library and the Czech Literary Centre are doing a good job in preparing this project, and we will see how the presentation in Frankfurt will look like. But what is important to point out is that the agency work and the effort to bring Czech writers into foreign languages is very much dependent on the Czech Ministry of Culture and their grants. These grants support the publications of Czech books abroad. So, foreign publishers can apply for funds that cover the translation costs and printing costs. And, without these grants, even the whole Frankfurt project will not be as successful. So my hope as an agent is that the Czech Ministry of Culture will keep those grants active, and that there's going to be a lot of finances in those grants, because that way, Czech writers have a chance to be published abroad.
I speak to people in many areas of the arts, including people who work for relatively big but still not huge film festivals, and pretty much everybody I meet is facing financial stress, at least. How is Czech literature, how are Czech writers and the Czech literary scene in general faring economically today?
Yeah, it's hard for me to judge the whole scene, but most recently there have been some cuts in grants for Czech literary magazines and for Czech literary festivals, and that's really disconcerting, because obviously, as you can imagine, editors of Czech literary magazines are doing the job for little money, and they can't even pay big fees to contributors, and so if they have even less money, then it'll just make the job much harder for them, and that's a big worry. And obviously, in terms of the foreign promotion, I think that in the past few years, the grants of the Czech Ministry of Culture for foreign publishers have been really working very well. I think even comparing to some other countries, we have a very functional grants support. And I'm only hoping that the Minister of Culture knows this and that they will keep this program alive, that there's going to be a lot of money even after Frankfurt in this grant program, because it may take a year or two till we see the Frankfurt effect. It might take some time, and it's important that we are ready for the interest coming from, let's say, the US or Spain and other countries.
To kind of backtrack a little bit, or maybe take a digression, sometimes it struck me in the past that there were Czech writers who enjoyed success, for example, in the 1980s, who perhaps weren't fantastic writers, but they had some kind of international profile or sympathy, essentially because of their story. Would you agree with that?
I agree with that. that goes also for the whole country, So we were, I think, more appealing to Western readers because obviously writers here were writing under pressure, during the Cold War. It was kind of exotic that some Polish or Czech novel or poetry collection would be published in the West, and so it made us more interesting, more appealing because of our political situation. Right now, it's a bit more difficult, but I think that there is still a potential, definitely, for us to be interesting.
When it comes to different genres, which are the ones that you think could give Czechia some international hits or that could sell relatively well?
I think it's definitely comics, or to be more precise, graphic novels. Even when I was still working at the Czech Literary Centre, we have had a lot of success promoting Czech comics abroad. I know that several Czech graphic novels have been recently published in a French translation in France, and France is obviously probably the most important comics country in Europe, maybe in the whole world, and so that's been great. And also there are other graphic novels published in Germany, in the UK, in Spain. So it seems that there is, some people even say it's a golden age of Czech comics right now, and there are some kind of established comic artists like Jaromír 99 or Jaromír Švejdík and Lucie Lmová. But then there are also many up-and-coming, talented artists like Štěpánka Jislova, Kateřina Čupová. And so that's really something, I think, special. And so graphic novels definitely are appealing. And then my kind of my background is in poetry. And so I believe we have several world-class poets. And, I'm lucky to represent people like Petr Hruška or Milan Těžinský, who has just been published in the US by a very, very good publishing house there. So I think in the kind of world of poetry, I think we also have something to offer.
You also work as a translator and editor at Carolinum Publishers. About your own translating work, are there any particular projects that you're most proud to have been involved with?
I work at Carolinum Press as a literary editor, so I focus on editing translations. But apart from that, I'm also a freelance translator, I would say. For example, last year I was very proud of one specific project, and it was an anthology of contemporary American poetry, which was published in Odeon. And I was the editor of the anthology, and also I translated probably 1/5 or 1/4 of the book. And so that anthology was, it was a long project, but I feel it was important because the last anthology before this one was published in 1990, so shortly after the revolution. And since then, there'd been no other book like that. So that's kind of what I'm proud about. And now the most recent thing is that at the end of May, so in a few days' time, my translation of Joshua Mensch's poetry book "Because" will be published by Druhé město in Brno. So Joshua Mensch is a poet, Canadian poet living in Prague for a long time, and his poetry collection "Because" was published by Norton in 2018, and it was shortlisted for the biggest Canadian award. So I'm very happy that now the Czech edition is going to be available as well.
Do you write poetry? Because when I was preparing for this interview, I was thinking, can you translate poetry if you're not a poet at all?
I don't write poetry myself, but it's hard to explain. I've always had a lot of fondness for poetry, and I feel I can understand poems well. And I almost don't want to be a poet at this point, because I feel that it gives me just I can be more objective in a way. I'm not expecting any favors from poets. I can just read their work, translate their work, edit their work. I feel that what you're saying maybe was more true, let's say 50 or 70 years ago, when most poets still wrote in form. They were using rhymes and meter. And then it's much more difficult to translate it. It's really sometimes almost impossible. Whereas right now, most people write in free verse, and even though I think it's still harder to translate it than fiction, I think you still need to pay attention to other things than when you translate prose. It's more manageable, and it's definitely something that non-poets can do. And also, maybe last point to this, when somebody asks me this question, I always reply, look at Martin Hilsky, who is one of the best translators we have ever had, and he's been able to translate Shakespeare's sonnets so well. It's hard to believe, when I read his translation. So, and I don't think he's a poet either. So it can be done.
I translate, for example, mainly shorter pieces, articles and the like, occasionally books. And I know how it works in terms of payment. You get paid per page. How does it work with poetry? Because there's a lot of thought must go into it, but it can't be measured in that way.
Yeah, you're right to ask this question. I mean, it's kind of complicated. In theory, you can be paid per line or per poem, but usually the payments for poetry translations are just symbolic. And most people I know that translate poetry, for them it's like a passion project that they've been kind of working on sometimes for years and just keep refining it, and they're just happy that they can publish it and translate the particular poet. So it's not great. It's understandable because obviously poetry, and especially poetry in translation, does not sell well. And so the publishers cannot really offer big payments. It's usually just a labor of love,
Getting back, before we end, to the literary agency of yours, how many writers have you got? Are you looking out for more? What's your plans in that regard?
So my agency at this point represents 15 authors, but I would like to add more. I'm also specifically looking to add, more writers and poets from Slovakia, potentially Poland and Germany. I don't want to focus just on Czech writers. So I'm going to be adding more, but obviously I need to be very careful not to add too many writers and only add those that I really would like to work with long term.
And where would you like the Zikmund Literary Agency to be in, let's say, 5 or even 10 years?
For independent literary agencies, I think the main goal is to basically survive, and to have enough funds to, do the agency work. I would like the agency to be kind of self-sufficient at some point, and that would allow me and my colleagues to have the time and energy for the writers. And in terms of the portfolio, and as I said, I would like to add more authors, and I would like for the portfolio to be really international. I also consider adding some American writers, especially American poets, and I would like to help them be published in Europe. So I would also like to do this agency work kind of in the opposite direction, not just from Czech into English and other languages, but also from English into Czech and Polish and so on. So I would like to, in the next years, to create a network, basically create a network of publishers and translators who like the authors that we represent, and hopefully this will lead to kind of more publications abroad.
Many thanks indeed to Jan Zikmund for speaking to me for Prague Talk, and the best of luck to him in his relatively new venture. If you're new to this podcast from Radio Prague International and enjoyed my chat with Jan, why not check out some of the earlier episodes of Prague Talk and subscribe wherever you get podcasts. I'm Ian Willoughby. Thank you so much indeed for listening to Prague Talk, and talk to you again very soon.